Hello. So I'm going to demonstrate the start of a modelling project for a character. I'm going to be enforcing some rules of engagement which are generally to do with remembering the key codes and key combos to use with a mouse to just begin to work efficiently and quickly. So the first part of the process is setting up your workspace. So I've gone over here, and if your workspace says general there, then change it to modeling standard. Now what you see here is the modeling toolkit, which is as it says, the kind of most useful bit, but you only spend majority of the time there, not all of it. And another area which is quite useful as well is the channel box, when you want to make some changes to something that you've put into being and you want to go back maybe and step back in some of the features that you've added and go back in history a little way and just tweak things slightly. Anyway, so here goes. Now where this project starts is in making sure that you're working to an understood scale, but we're working in centimetres by default, so that's a happy kind of scenario to go in with. And we also taking a view to if our character needs to be output into some other kind of software. So this would be suitable, for instance, if it was going into a game engine, and we've got a game engine idea that runs on a unit equaling 1 centimetre. So if we get the scale right here, we don't have to worry about whatever it goes to. And this is a really good rule, no matter what your destination, I don't know, media is, to always think about scale and what someone else might do with your model when it's finished. Many 3D artists work in industries where that's all they do, and then someone else takes their model and fits it into any number of different scenarios and other bits of software. So if we start with a scaling idea, and that idea is to use reference imagery for the profile of the object, but also to govern its scale. So here's how that works. So we're going to start making some reference planes and then get the basics of a box model started. So to make reference planes is fairly simple. You go to the View menu, down to Image Plane and Import Image. Okay, so my image is here. So I'll choose this one. This is the front image, and you'll notice I'm in the middle of a perspective view, so when I put this image plane in, it might not be in the right place. So let's see what happens. Okay, so we've got a reference plane bunged in the perspective view, and that means because it's we started with perspective, and the perspective kind of doesn't understand anything about itself, so it puts this reference plane image in a place that's not particularly relevant. And as you can see, I'm zooming in and out using the scroll wheel, and the grid is sizing, but the reference plane isn't moving at all, so this is no good. So I'm just going to undo this. For ordering your workspace, now the best thing to do would be to change the workspace to be this 4-panel view like this, and then you can see for a front view it would go in this workspace or viewport here, and then for the side view it would go here. So being a character, we've got front and side views. So at the moment, that's not a consideration that we need to worry about in terms of the top view, but some objects do have a top view. So this is actually the best place to try and set your viewport. So if I go into this front view here and go View, Image Plane, Import Image, and there's my image. And now if I zoom in this viewport, the plane is actually situated in it rather than kind of stuck in front of the camera. Okay, so image plane to the particular port it's intended for. Now this one apparently is the right-hand view, as it says. So let's see what happens when we put my image plane that I've nominated as being the right. Now it's a view of the right of the character, and the character is facing in a right direction, and that looks kind of pretty good. Now the thing that's wrong with both of these objects is that they are they're the same size, which is too darn small. So this is where we might need the channel box. I could do with seeing the outliner as well. Window, General Editor. So if I wanted to get the channel box back, by the way, there, that's how I would get that. Oh, there it is, outliner. So this is really useful to be able to see what's going on. So in the outliner you get a sort of default view of objects, light set and object set. Don't really know what that's for, but it exists. So I've got image plane 1 and 2 here, and through selecting these I can get a bit more control over what's going on in the scene. Now if I zoom in over here, we can see that the image planes have arrived, and using the view cube I can kind of orient myself a bit. Let's go back for a nice diagonal view. But actually the image plane that's got my character facing the right hand side, facing right and looking at the right side of the character, is probably the wrong way around. So that's another thing I need to fix up. Kind of don't worry about this if it's not clear what's going on. When you do your own, you'll work it out. So first thing I'm going to do actually is move my image planes around, because this spot here is the center of Workspace, and that's actually where I want to build my model. So I just want to move my image planes back a bit. Now this is the time that I want to introduce an aspect that's not part of Maya, but I'm using it to help demonstrate, because it's important you get to grips with some shortcuts to stop you having to move the cursor away from what you're modeling so frequently. I've got this thing here called show off, and what it does is demonstrate any of the keyboard buttons or keyboard keys and any of the mouse buttons that I'm clicking down with. So if I go across the mouse clicking down on the different keys as I go, and you can see there was a little menu came up there when I touched right button, so it shows which buttons I'm clicking down on. If I just use the scroll wheel, it shows nothing, because it needs click to demonstrate. You can tell when I'm using the scroll wheel, because you'll see some numbers kind of tumbling up and down in value, or you'll see the viewport zooming in and out like that. I think that's kind of all it's used for in terms of scrolling. Anyway, so image plane 1 is the one from the front viewport that needs to move backwards. So to do a move, I need to touch the W key on the keyboard. So there's the W key, and then just grab this, and I'm just pushing it back a number which the viewport isn't kind of reflecting back to me. Now it looks like I'm pushing it back a long way, but that's actually because the plane isn't very big. Okay, now this plane is not only too close, it's actually the wrong way round, so I'm just going to move that out of the way. Now if you take a look at the show off now, I'm going to orbit round, so spin the view round so we can see the intended angle. Let's finger on the Alt key, that's next to the space bar, and then just drag left cursor, left mouse button. And there we are. So this is where our object's going to turn up. And if I put it in right now, which is from the modelling shelf, polymodelling shelf, a cube. So this cube is a centimetre squared, or cubed indeed. And it's not going to stay that long for very long. But back to my reference plane. So this reference plane here is the wrong way round. It's orientated the wrong way round. So I'm going to go for the E key, which you can just see has changed this icon here. So we've got just select, don't do any other changes, and that's Q. Then move, rotate, and scale. Okay, and you can see the little keyboard combo. So having done this, I'm not going to make any more reference to the doing of that. Now I could grab this ring here and do my rotation, which is sort of okay. At the moment though, it's very freehand. Now that's, yeah, I can be a bit lazy with that and leave that like that. But if I want it to be dead accurate, so seeing that this is the green axis I've been spinning, which is the Y, around the Y axis, if I go to the channel box, so up here is how you get the channel box. I can read off its rotation value here, which should be 270, spot on. So if you do need things to be kind of geometrically accurate, and for some things you really do need that perfection in numbers, this maybe not so much. The other thing I'd mentioned before, which was that the image planes are the wrong size. So I'm not going to be misled by these numbers here. I've got no idea what size X and Y means for the image planes. And the scale is set to 1, and we're just going to leave that. You don't really much need to mess with the scale fields here. What's slightly hidden is, of course, the inputs for this object. So when you're editing an object and you need to edit its size and keep the numerical value for size, not messing around with scale at all in the number fields. Now these are just a little bit fuzzy, so it may be that the input doesn't necessarily reveal itself. However, I have just revealed the width and height numbers that I need to change, and you can see they're set to 8. So I'm just going to set these to 180 centimeters. Now this is about the size of a slightly taller than an average human, 180. 1 meter 80, sort of nearly 6 foot in old money. Now this number here, 180, this is how I want my character to be. So let's just have a quick look at these image planes. I'm going to now switch to the 2 view, and I'll spend a lot of the modelling time in this view, because it allows a couple of things which are really quite useful. So in the 2 view, I can see my model and I can model directly against it, and I've got a front view, no perspective, which means if I map this, because my drawing goes all the way to the edge of the paper, then I can rely on this model to be pretty much 180 centimeters tall. So by using a reference plane, an image plane of the right size, and making sure that your drawing is right to the edge of the reference plane, then you've got your sizing for everything kind of sorted out. And if you knew the size of anything that was kind of part of the character or part of the accessories that you were building onto the character, then of course that scaling would help. It also helps when you're doing specific sizes, like for you're trying to do, say, a consistent extrude, then you can come up with a particular dimension, which means you're going to get that every time if you use that number. And even if you need just kind of a ballpark number, it's still better than just having really no idea how big your object is going to be ultimately. Anyway, so this approach will work for anything, of course. If you have things from the real world that you're modelling virtual versions of, then if you measure them and then you make your image plane where the biggest dimension of the object is the exact size of the image plane, then you're going to get the right size for stuff. Kind of makes it all a bit more logical. Okay, so the establishment of scale is really best done early on, and early on it doesn't help so much, but later it does really become quite useful that you know how big things are, you know what sort of size extrude you're doing for certain things, and if you're making anything, an artifact, you're making something constructed rather than natural, then similar size fittings, fitments, or bits of structural element mean that you kind of end up knowing a bit of a rule of thumb size for things that works in the whatever project you're working on for the length of the project. So it just makes you faster. Anyway, this bit's going quite slowly and we want to zoom past that. So draw your character to the edge of the file or the image, crop it in Photoshop if it doesn't match up, and if you put reference images on a square, if you can possibly manage that, or go proportionate, make it 2 by 1 or 4 by 1. If it's, for instance, something long and thin like a gun, then you might want to go 4 by 1. But use that biggest dimension as a sizing thing through the image plane. For other stuff where maybe you think you don't need a reference image, or you've just got you've got the need to size it to a particular size, you can always use boxes of certain sizes and kind of model them to fit that, or just an empty image plane, for instance. Anyway, enough of that, let's crack on. So the channel box you need quite often for tweaking things, or for going in and manipulating original size of stuff. It can kind of, I don't know if the word is save you, but it certainly can be useful at times. So I've got my channel box sort of bunged here up the top, and actually it's probably better off below, but I'll just drag and redock this, see if I can replace it at the top. There we go. So the modelling toolkit, let's kind of dock that and then shut it down. The attribute editor may well be useful at some point, but not for a while yet. Goodness me. A little bit of reluctance there. Anyway, so if you need your modeling toolkit or your channel box or the attribute editor I just turned off, there's your toolkit, there's your attribute editor, and here's your channel box, show hide. Okay, so I'm just going to orbit around in here. So I'm looking at the side of the object now. I've still got a really small image plane, number one. So let's get into the channel box on that one, all the way down to width and height. And again, that's 180. When you're making your reference images, do it kind of in the same Photoshop file, so you can have them in adjacent layers, and you can kind of map across chins and kneecaps and groins and armpits and elbow height, etc., etc. Any key features you need to map across, do it in the same file, so you know you're going to get something that's top of head to bottom of feet, or for any other type of object indeed. So just going to move that the planes backwards a bit. I don't want them that close because I want to be able to kind of see around the back or the opposite side of the object. So I'm going to go to the move tool and just push that back and select that one, push that back. Okay, you might remember I've got my little cube, PQ1, that's stuck in the middle still, and that needs to grow. So I'm just going to make some guesstimations as to a torso for a human who's going to be slightly corpulent, a bit tubby around the torso, and just kind of use my rule of thumb sizing for that. Okay, so if we look at the scale for my PQ1, it's still 1, and we're not going to touch that. Go down to the inputs, and here we've got width, height and depth. So width, it's going to be 40 wide. It's going to be 60 high. So I'm kind of thinking of a a person's torso rather than sort of conjuring up numbers out of thin air. 30, and then subdivisions. This is where you have to just think carefully about making sure you get a center line, because we're going to be working with symmetry. You might have spotted me turning symmetry off earlier. 4, high is going to be 6, and subdivision's depth is going to be 2. Okay, I'm using the tab key, which you might have spotted, and obviously the number keys to put the number in. And when if you just look down here, you can see my cursor flashing there. That one's not quite registered yet, so hit the return key, and that should fix it in. And now you look at the cube, and we've got the center line going down the middle. So if I look at the front view, there's a lovely center line there. Now, it took me just a little while to get my head round the way symmetry works, and it's pretty good. It's not totally bulletproof, but what you can do is if you're just using a kind of fairly narrow range of tools, symmetry will work pretty well. Now what we're going to do in terms of symmetry, I'm just lifting this up so I can get it to the right kind of height relative to my reference plane. What you can do with symmetry is leave the object as it is. You don't need to delete anything off of it. It just then works as is. We've got our object in the middle of Workspace. We've got our, certainly the line of symmetry we need is still on the middle, even though I moved it. So I can go to Symmetry and choose World X. So I'm using kind of the position of stuff in relative to world space to make sure it does what I do on one side the same on the other. And I think it's kind of ambidextrous, so it doesn't matter which side you work on, the other side will adjust. Okay, so I'm just going to do a few more adjustments on the shape of this, because as we start working various things into being, do want to make sure that we can just tweak things along the way. And so I've just used change to edit mode. So what I'm going to do here is double click on top and just push these back. What I'm doing is trying to keep flat sides on the top, because I'm going to, in not too long time, I'm going to build a head out from this. Okay, and then eventually I'm going to start moving these corners in, but I'm not going to do that yet. I want also a nice flat bit here to build the arms out from. And so when extruding, if you can have the start from completely flat base, you're going to get sort of much more controllable behavior. And if you need a kind of uneven tip, then you do that at the end when you've finished all the extrusion. Now for legs, I can kind of think about those a bit as flat sort of within themselves, but opposite, different angles from each other. So if I was to do legs from here, then they would extend down the same and they would be stuck together, so like one big leg, which was just one long extrusion. So if I go to polygon mode, and I'm going to change the selection to drag, which you might find sort of easy to do by just dragging over the ones you want to select. And I'm going to use E on the keyboard to go to rotate mode. And I'm just going to rotate these so when I grow the legs from the extrude, they're just going to taper out slightly. Now you can see that that's what I've got on the reference image. Looking on this side, going close in here, the legs taper out slightly. There's a reason for that. That's to do with putting a skeleton into your character. If you're going to use any kind of automated process, or indeed if you're going to do it by hand, it's still easier if there's a bit of a gap between the legs. For the most part, some characters are going to be somewhat corpulent and might have legs that are quite close together at the top, but nonetheless you should try and arrange, if you can, a gap between them. The rule often established is the gap between the character's feet should be about the size of the width of their head. So you imagine they've got a head football stuck between their feet. That might help you kind of visualize how to form the character. So we've got the legs kind of built to angle out, so I guess we might as well do start doing the leg extrude now. So let's make sure that the legs split. So in edge object, I'm going to drag from that edge to that edge. You can see I accidentally picked up two other edges. I've done that before, much better than that. So I've got 4 edges selected. So if you want to exclude, hold down the control and just click them. Of course it's symmetrical, so just one click was needed to do both sides. Okay, and then in edge mode you have this bevel, which allows you to just create a little split of an edge which creates two new polys and then keeps these leg bits separate. Okay, so I'm going to now go back to polygon mode, and I need to drag select these four, which will get the mirror on the other side, and then have a go at that extrude. So hit the extrude button, get the menu up. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and then start dragging down, and I'm looking mainly at the front view now, just to get the nearest little notch, and then just taper that in quite a bit, and then another thing that's quite useful is the circular eyes. So I'm going to circularize those and see what we get. Now this might break the symmetry. So circularize is quite useful. Now see, I think that's probably broken the symmetry. You can see how that one's pretty straight on, and that one's much more twisted. And if I applied twist to sort of try and correct that, I've got a kind of overlap. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just undo past that. What I am going to do is just carry on with the extrude. It's better to be able to circularize, but it's not sort of critical. I wonder if I try scaling and just try and get them a little bit more square overall. Then maybe circularize might work a bit better. It looks a lot better. We've still got that non-symmetrical twist though. Okay, can't win them all. Okay, so I'm going to go and extrude again. That re-zeros the dialogue. Looks like nothing's happened, but it's doing as I wish. So I'm going to just extrude down to about the knee point. Nearest taper offset in. And then I think it's pretty clear to just go down, do 2 divisions, but make that length go down, and there you can see we've got an edge thing sort of nicely nicely placed around about the knee, so that's pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to leave that and then just show what we can do with the arm. Okay, so if I select nothing, click in space, spin round, still in polygon mode, so drag select round, oops, these 4, got one too many, control key, exclude. It's got quite a nice flat spot here, but it's not going to look particularly arm shaped, so we're going to need to do similar things. So extrude again, build out the thickness a little way, shrink it in a bit, and let's try circularize again. Now there's a twist there. Now if it's symmetrical the other side, that's not too bad, it looks symmetrical to me. Okay, so rather than use twist, so twist works like that, which seems great, but I think it breaks symmetry, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to 0 that, return key, and see what happens if I just use plain old rotate. Now if we'd done we were extruding something off axis, so not at 0 or 90 degrees to any axis, then you can't really use rotate to fix your issue. but this should be able to go, and then we go around that side. Yeah, that seems, that's, it doesn't have to be spot on, just sort of by eye, roughly. And probably a scale, because it's looking a bit chunky, so I need the little red square. Just do these up to about the same amount. Right, and then let's do the arms. So just zoom into one arm and then just do a couple of divisions, and that'll be it. Oh, so we've got a little bit of a rotation there, so it's, the whole thing is going upwards. Best solution for that is, having seen it, if I just check. So I'll just see what's gone on here. So I've still got the poly extrude face. Now I don't really need that. So if I select that one, so as you can see it did nothing. There's a bit of a pivot issue there. So I can probably delete that. So you can do that by going Edit, Delete Node, and not have kind of something that didn't really do anything stuck there in your history. Okay, so back to this, and then just make sure in poly mode, checking here, 8 faces selected, which is the ones on both sides, and yeah, I can see clearly it's going to extrude uphill, as it were. So I'm just going to twizzle those. The perspective view is of course showing you something that's fairly level, as though it's somehow pointing downwards slightly. The reason why we want it to be absolutely as kind of level as possible is it just makes all the extrusions and corrections you might need to do along the way down the arm, makes all that a little bit easier. Okay, so we've got fairly good sized base for the arm, but it's not quite in the best possible shape yet. Anyway, we can proceed and crack on with the extrude. All the way down to there. Offset it down and add a division for the elbow. A bit chunky, but we can still, oops, orthographic views are currently locked. Oh, now I don't know if you notice, but if you look at the display, as I click and drag on the scroll wheel, it's updating these fields here. So I just get a grip of that and stop it from overdoing. And we're going to stop just about here. One last thing to do is just to just consider that the arm itself won't be really circular, and the circularity is just to make it seem like it's you know, going towards something a bit more organic than it is currently. Just a couple of things to do. Now we've made the arms, we've still got a massive box effect on the torso, so go to edge mode, double click an edge. Now you can see that edge selection has gone quite nicely up to there and then stopped, so it kind of terminates because there's a junction there to where the extrude started. Now one thing you might not have noticed, which is worth bearing, not just bearing in mind, but all the model currently is still four-sided polygons, also known as quads. And this is a really kind of key skill. It's not necessary that the whole thing has to be only quads. And we'll at some point need to kind of break out that constraint. But it is important that any item, any area that you want to have much more detail in it, kind of quickly and conveniently, any area you want to be able to make really quite super smooth or super detailed, all of those need to be maintained as quads. That means if you're going to do some sculpting, you could just put the mesh into your sculpting software and it would very comfortably subdivide into a super detailed mesh that you can then do some really sweet sculpting on. But without that, really, it's you know, if you lose the quads, then it won't subdivide very easily, and you have to do loads of stuff by hand. That really, you just want the software to do all the subdivisions for you. So just by moving a few things around, by just taking control over the shape of things yourself, but adding detail progressively. Obviously what's next is a neck and a head, and shoes, feet, and some hands. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there, and we'll do a bit more on this. No worries. Okay, bye for now.